right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Gauron, and I'll be your host for today. We are getting nicely into November now, and we have a really busy month in store for you. Lots of different little themes going on. One of the really cool ones coming up is plants. So we're taking a dive into our green planet. Oftentimes, plants are ignored in favor of the big charismatic animals, but plants have crazy wildlife that they're just on a different time scale than us. So we don't usually see all the action that's happening. So we're going to dive into that world over this month. We have a really nice segment on human health coming together. We'll be talking about our brain and how we can recover from injuries using video games and all sorts of cool things from the health world. So keep an eye out for those. And we're jam-packed with virtual field trips. We're going to the Vermont Institute of Natural Sciences tomorrow with the raptors. We'll be at Eden Project, the world's largest indoor rainforest, later in the week. What else is coming up? At the zoos with the orangutan. So we have a jam-packed month coming up. A newsletter went out last night, so we hope to see lots of your classrooms registering for those live events. Well, let's get into today's action. Today, we're going to spend a little time with Julianne Gauron. She is a freelance photographer, full-time freelance photographer specializing in documentary, editorial, and commercial photography through her business, Snow on the Road. So her stories focus on humanitarian, environmental, agricultural, and adventure narratives. She is really passionate about the power of stories, how we can connect people and use that to inspire change. Her work's been published in major media, and she's directed award-winning documentary short film series, Dear Senator. So we've got Julianne joining us here from Boston. Let me get her in front and center. Hey, Julianne, how are you?
Hey, Joe. I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Of course. It's so great to have you with us. This is your first Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. So hopefully we get lots of questions for you.
Yes.
But what we really want to do is get to know you and dive into some of the places photography is taking you, some of the stories you've told.
Yeah, thank you so much. I can jump right in. Is that
all right?
Good?
Yeah, I've got your presentation loaded up. We're ready.
Great. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to the questions. So I'll jump in. So I wanted to start off by just explaining a little bit about what a documentary photographer is. So yeah, what is a documentary photographer? So what it means is that I tell stories about real people and real places. This means there's no faking it allowed. Another way that people describe what documentary photography is photojournalism, which is really important in the world today. So, you know, we can't use AI. We can't pose people. We tell real stories about places. And the reason that this matters, especially now, is that, you know, I get to go to places that lots of people don't get to go. People like me, we go to these places. And by taking photographs, we bring other people to these places. And the hope is that we connect people and we create empathy. And, you know, it's a big world and we all lead different lives, but photography and storytelling, it makes us all feel a little bit more like we know each other. And a little bit about me. So why did I become a photographer? Well, I've wanted to travel since I was much younger than all of you. I had Nat Geo magazines by my bed. All I wanted to do when I grew up was travel, but I didn't quite know how to do that. But I come from a family of storytellers, mostly, you know, reading books and telling stories verbally. But I was always very creative. And I'm also very, very curious about people. I want to ask them all the questions, and I never grew out of that. And I recommend you never give up your curiosity. It's one of the most important tools you have as an adult. And a lot of adults lose that when they grow up. You know, kids are curious, and we forget to be curious as adults. So for me, my curiosity is the most important tool I have in my job. And because I have this camera as my other tool, my camera is my permission to go anywhere. Oh, and sorry, this last slide, I'm not usually the story. I'm behind the camera, but I wanted to start out by showing you some pictures. So on the left is me with a dog in Mongolia that I was doing a story on. And on the right is in Africa taking a break. And then on the left here, I'm working in Nepal. And on the right, I'm interviewing a woman farmer. That was this spring in Uganda. And so I work with organizations and magazines, newspapers, as Joe said, to tell stories. Because if I take the picture, but it doesn't go anywhere, who cares? So people hire me to tell a story about, farmers in rural Uganda, or this dog in Mongolia that's really important in conservation. And we hope to make connections. And my passion is that, we care about these places and these people, and we do something about it through the stories. But for me, also, the reason I love what I get to do is that I get to go to these places because it's my job that you wouldn't go as a tourist. That was in Malawi. Some school kids were acting like I was a rock star, which obviously I'm not. But they don't see a lot of white people in this part of the country. It's a very small, very poor country. And you can see in this video, I am dancing here, which I'm pretty shy, but we were in a traffic stop for 6 hours in Nepal, and everyone got out and danced, and they pulled us in and we danced. And so that's one of my favorite things about being a photographer and a storyteller, is that I get to go to these places because it's my job and meet people I would never get to meet and live in their homes. And, it can be hard also, like there often aren't toilets and showers and, there's never food that I would have at my home in Boston. But I also feel really, really privileged to do this work because I meet these people, and now I have friends all over the world. So I'm going to show you a few stories, and then at the end, we can circle back to any questions you have. So this is a story that's a lot closer. It's closer to Joe, really. So I worked in Canada with college students. This was their first field research. So to be a scientist in the field, you have to work in the field. This was their first assignment. And this young woman, she has a bird in her hand that's actually a burrowing bird, and it's threatened, unfortunately. And so I was there for a month. We had outhouses, solar electricity, so that there would be very little damage to the island, so the birds would have all of the conservation land, protection. And this science station has been there for 100 years. Generations of students. And so this was them on their break. They cooked all their meals. And so I was documenting how the students worked on the island. So I lived with them. I followed them daily out in the rain, sat with them with the birds, learned about it. That's one of the things that I love as someone who's so curious, is I get to ask questions. How? Why? What are you doing? Why does this matter? And then I document this and create the story. So this bird on the right that she's holding, that's that same bird. It's called a Leach's storm petrel. And it burrows in the ground, and then it flies hundreds of miles every time it goes fishing for food. And unfortunately, like a lot of seabirds, they're in decline. And so they're studying them. This is the professor who leads the science station. She's taking a blood sample, and they track them and they weigh them to make sure that they have all the data, so that then they can put protections in place with the government, so they can push the government to do this. Here, the students, Sejal and Molly and Lily, are running a study on the herring gulls. And Lily is wearing a helmet because she's gotten struck by the gulls so many times, because they're a little bit aggressive. And so here we have a tree swallow. And unfortunately, this was last summer in the Bay of Fundy. And it was a very rainy summer, and it was a very smoky summer. If you remember, there were a lot of fires in Canada. And so sadly, none of the baby tree swallows survived because it was too rainy for the parents to hunt for food. So all of the students who were studying those birds, it was pretty hard for them. This was their first time doing field research, and they had to, document all of that. And then I was photographing the students documenting that, and that's part of their job. And Sejal on the right, she was watching the parents return, caring for the young. And I didn't know a lot about, didn't know a lot about bird conservation, but that's also one of the things that's really interesting as a photographer in this space is I try to learn in advance, but then when I'm on a job and trying to tell a story, I get to learn about something that's important and that I'm curious about. So this story is currently being reviewed for a magazine. And then this is a totally different story. It's an environmental story also, but it's also similarly a human story. So this was a story that I pursued. I love animals and I love conservation stories. So there's a dog in Mongolia that is used for livestock guardian dog. You may have heard of these. They're becoming somewhat popular in the US. So rather than being a pet, it lives with the animals and it protects them. So this was our truck as we were driving out from central, the city in Mongolia called Ulaanbaatar. It's the only big city. I flew into Ulaanbaatar. I met with the head of the nonprofit bringing the puppies up. This dog is called the Mongolian Bankar dog, and it was in decline. And then this nonprofit that I connected with, they're breeding them, and they're placing this dog with nomadic herders in Mongolia. And the reason they're doing this is because people in Mongolia, they typically live out in places like this. This is the edge of the Gobi Desert, one of the hardest places to live in the world. It's one of the largest deserts. And people, they raise camels, goats, or yaks, which I believe I have some pictures of. But there's also wildlife, as there should be. And the wildlife, they could hunt for other wild animals, or it's even easier to go grab a goat. And people need to protect their goats because instead of having money in the bank, the goats are their bank account. The goats have baby goats. That makes more money. But if a goat gets eaten, those people have lost some of their money. So they need to protect these goats from its wolves and snow leopards. So these dogs, these Bankar livestock guardian dogs, are very important, but they were in decline. There were not many left because of the communist government. So this nonprofit has been breeding them and placing them with herders that wanted this dog. So I traveled with the nonprofit to the west of Mongolia, which is in Central Asia. Very few people, as you can see, really no roads, nothing paved. And I stayed with families to photograph how they lived with these dogs, how life was improved. I don't think this story is done. I want to go back. But it was an amazing start. So these are two young men. The boy on the left with a red hat, this is his family's dog. And it was like 70 degrees here, but at night it was about 30. And in the winters, it's very, very cold. It is negative 40 degrees, if you can believe it. So very cold. And these dogs are out in all of that weather. But she's right there. She's very hot. You can see her tongue sticking out. So this is how we traveled. I traveled with my friend Batra, who runs the nonprofit. So when we were going out to see the families, we would drive. We're not on a road. You can see this is our truck. We would just drive across the landscape. He knew the way. I did not. And we would camp. You can see our little tents. They were sort of like, coffin sized. And we would camp and then we would drive and we had all our food. And it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, and reminded me how fortunate I am to do this work. And then towards the end of the trip, it started snowing and I felt less fortunate because I did not have winter gear. But it was still amazing. So these are some of the goats my friend Baya taught. We stayed with his family. That's him in the background. He had two of the dogs. Hooter and, oh, I can't think of the male dog's name, but he's driving them out from milking here. These are cashmere goats. So if you have a family member who has a cashmere sweater, this is not cashmere, but very, very nice sweater, that's where they come from. Cashmere goats in Mongolia, they're very, the cashmere is very soft because these goats live in such extreme environments. So when I'm creating a story like this, I can give you a little bit more of what I do. I want to tell a story so you feel like you're there. So I try to create pictures of the people, the place, what's happening, big landscapes so you feel like you're there, small moments so you feel like, you have those small moments when you're there. And I want to really bring you into how it is we live. So, or the people I'm staying with live. So this is a home. This is a ger, and it's in the Mongolian steppes, which is the grasslands. Most of Mongolia are steppes, unless it's in the Gobi Desert. So I'm trying to create a sense of place for you, the viewer, and that's my job. Even though it's an amazing experience to be there, I'm working the whole time because I'm trying to bring you, or whoever's reading the magazine or working with a nonprofit, I want to make them feel like they're in Mongolia also. So this is one of the dogs. This is the female of this family. Her name is Hooter, and she was very sweet and very friendly. And she's going out for the day, so I'm trying to capture an image of her working. And in the background, you see my friend Bayatot. And we stayed with them in their yurt. And so Hooter will go out for the day, and she'll stay with the goats all day, protecting them. And then at night, she comes back to the yurt, or in Mongolia, it's called a ger. And she protects us at night from the wolves also. And then this is Bayartad's wife, Oyambilik, and she's getting the goats together in the morning. The kids, the baby goats, are ready to be weaned, so she's pulling some of those out. And then with all those goats, we're in the desert. What do you think we eat? We ate goat. So a lot of meat in Mongolia because it's very, very dry and they cannot be farmers there. And there are not a lot of supermarkets. The nearest town was about 3 hours away over very big mountains. So everything they ate, they had to raise. So you can see a little bit of garlic in the bottom. That was from the land. A little bit of, I think, wild onion in the jar. They made that too. And then the goat meat, which we just ate off the bone. And we sit on the floor just like that. So, when you're in a place traveling like this, you adjust and you need to be a part of the culture, which is an honor. It's always an honor, but sometimes it's a little challenging. I'd never eaten meat sitting like that before. So they laughed a lot, but I laughed a lot too at myself. Okay, so this is a very different story here. So this was this spring. And sorry to go back. So on the Mongolia piece, I am actually hoping to go back. I don't know if it will be this winter because I need to figure some things out. But if I can go back, surprisingly, the puppies are born in the winter, which is surprising to me because it's so, so cold. So if you think about it, starts to snow here in America around 32 degrees freezing. It is -40 there in the winter. So that's 70 degrees colder. Imagine. But that's when the puppies are born. So I need to figure out if I can go back there. And then also how to make sure my camera gear won't freeze because batteries freeze and fingers freeze and eyeballs freeze. But I want to document the puppies being born and the puppies learning to protect the goats, to continue that story because I don't think it's finished. So that's where that story is. So then this is another project I'm working with a nonprofit here rather than a magazine. So this is about rural farmers in Africa. I'm working with a nonprofit in the US that supports these farmers. In Africa, a lot of people, they raise the food that they need. Same in some parts of Asia. So these families are in Uganda and Mozambique for this job. So this is a small village in northern Uganda on the edge of South Sudan that I stayed in. And these, right in the front, these are mangoes. So this village, I stayed overnight in Paicho, and it's mostly women in this village because there was terrorism in this area, unfortunately, for many, many years. It is not going on anymore, fortunately. So people are now able to farm and they're becoming more prosperous. That's why the nonprofit is there to help them become more stable. And one small silver lining, it's very unfortunate they had the conflict, but the women are getting to be leaders in the community. They're learning to be farmers, which isn't always the case in other countries in the world, right? Women aren't always supported in leadership. So in this community, women are the farmers and the leaders, which was very special for me to work there. And I stayed with this family. I'm still in touch with Bessantina and my friend Jane. And this is in front of their home. It's a beautiful home. And this is, in this part of Africa, people tend to live in mud homes or concrete, with a thatched roof. Of course, there's no electricity. But they had a beautiful bed inside and tables and chairs, and we had a delicious dinner. The cooking house is a separate house behind me as I'm taking this picture. And so then this is the nonprofit I was working with. You can see Eric in the middle there, and Bona and Godfrey are the two Ugandans who work with all the farmers locally, so that it's not an American coming in and telling, Ugandans how to do something. It's Ugandans are teaching Ugandans, which is the better way to do it. We wouldn't know how to farm in Africa, of course. So these are all the women who are having support, becoming better farmers. They're getting loans to buy seeds. And then this was when I was staying over in that community. I want to show the people who are donating to this nonprofit that these are people just like you and I. They have families, they have hopes. They want to be safe. They want to have friends and go to school, and wherever we live in the world, how we live looks different. And that's part of the excitement of going to these places. But how we want to live is not that different. And that's something I really work hard to show. We all want to be loved. We all want to be safe. We all want to, thrive and have enough money to be okay and for our family to be okay. And that is not that different. And also, I think people imagine it's unsafe in other parts of the world. And of course, there are conflicts, but people are so kind and they're so generous. And I always want to show that, because I think that's a really important part of my job also, is to show that we have so much in common around the world, more in common than we think. So this is another part of that project. I was in Mozambique staying with my friend Anita and her daughter. Unfortunately, Anita's husband had passed away during COVID. But she's coming from, that hut is the cooking hut, because cooking is over a fire. It's very smoky. And unfortunately, it's very bad for women, but that's how cooking is done in Africa. And these are her sons, because her husband is no longer in the family. He passed away. Her sons now have to farm, because what they eat is what they grow. So these are the two oxen, and they don't go to school anymore because they have to work. So I wanted to also show, why it's important that this nonprofit is supported, because we have to support people so they can have better opportunities. And that was part of my job on that. Oh, and that is about the end. So I can put any of these back up. I can talk to any of them specifically, or anything that I maybe didn't cover in depth that you guys have questions about.
Okay, sounds good, Julianne. So those who are tuning in via YouTube, don't be shy to use the chat sidebar. Send in some of your questions. I've got some questions here already as well. But it looks like photography has taken you to some amazing places: Uganda, Mongolia, here in Canada, other places around the world. So it really is, your camera really is an important storytelling tool. It's pretty awesome.
It is.
All right. Well, let's get into some Q&A action. So let's see. Okay. So this question here is from a 4th grade class. They're wondering what the hardest thing was about being in Mongolia for you.
It's a great question. The hardest, I have a good one. The hardest thing about Mongolia, well, 2 maybe. So unfortunately, you always have to be careful packing for jobs like this. And I do work at near home as well. I do work in Boston, but I wanted to share some of the exciting trips. But so I packed for Mongolia for a very wide temperature range. I packed for, I think it was 80 degrees because I was in the desert and it was September. So I knew it was going to be very hot. And then I knew it could be pretty cold, but it wasn't winter. It was September. So I packed for about 35 degrees. So a lot of hot, weather clothing and then cold. But towards the end of the trip, it snowed. And so I had a few nights where I woke up frozen into my tent, which was tough because I was very cold. So there was that. And then the other thing, you always want to be nice when people, respectful. People are sharing their lives and their food. And I do whatever I'm invited to do, as long as it's safe, and eat whatever I'm offered. And so I was offered marmot, which is like a groundhog. And it was very chewy and a little bit not my thing. And I usually can do it, but I had to go get my camera and I gave the marmot to the dog.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I bet you there are very few students tuning in right now who have ever had marmot.
Yes.
And I think that if they were in the same situation, that they may
Tough
have
one.
fed some to the dog too.
Yes.
So, all right.
Don't recommend.
Okay, let's see. So do you ever find that people are hesitant to be photographed, and how do you approach people?
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. People can be shy anywhere. And I always ask permission, whether I'm in the US or overseas. And sometimes we don't have the same language. Like I studied a little bit of Mongolian. I studied different languages when I try to go somewhere, so that I have enough to ask and be polite. But even if I don't have the language, I'll hold up my camera and, sort of gesture. And if they say no, like I always want to be respectful. And I often will just sit with people and spend time to show that I am not scary. But some cultures, cameras are viewed as taking your soul. Or just, even in the US, it's like, I don't know you. What are you going to do with that? So I always, if someone doesn't want a picture, they don't owe me a picture. And I never push.
All right. I think that's a pretty good philosophy to have. And it looks like you're pretty successful. I think if you just talk to somebody, explain what it's about, I think that usually helps kind of alleviate worries and break down some barriers.
Yeah. And I also try to spend time in communities. So sometimes, especially if it's somewhere very different than where I come from, or if I am very different from them, I won't go in right away taking pictures because that's not polite.
Mhm.
Like you wouldn't even do that here if you
Yeah.
didn't know someone. And so I try to come in and eat some food or do whatever is being done and hang out and then say, may I do this?
All right. This is a fun question from a grade 6 class in Toronto. They want to know, do you have an instance of a shot that you missed that you're upset about, but also a shot that was unexpected that turned out to be a really good one?
Oh gosh, so many images that I probably missed. I don't even I try to forget the ones I've missed, but I had my first big job because I've only been doing this for a few years. This is my second career. I was a designer before. But my first big job was actually biking across a country in Africa, which was tough because it was my first magazine job and I had never really biked that far. So I trained for 9 months and then did this. It was Botswana. So a lot of elephants. And there was one night in one camp where there was an elephant who came very close. And I had biked 100 miles that day. So I was very tired and I didn't have my camera with me at that moment because I was recovering and I was so tired. And the elephant was right there. And I don't know if I could have gotten it because all I saw was elephant, but I wished I'd had a camera. And many times I think there are pictures you don't know what it will be, and they're sort of a gift. I think that's one of my favorite things about photography, honestly, is you work very hard and you put yourself in the place to get it right, but it always feels a bit like magic. Um, like there's one picture on my website, I was trying to show what it was like to be at the science station in Canada and what so that the viewer would feel what it's like to be around the birds. And the seagulls were just they would hit you on the head. They didn't want you there. They would hit you and like we would have to put up our arm. And I was trying to show this experience for the viewer. So I had my camera above me taking pictures, but I didn't want my camera to get pooped on. So I was sort of doing this because we were getting pooped on. And so I got this beautiful picture of just a wing flying over me, but I didn't know until I looked after because I was working hard to take the pictures without getting hit or pooped on.
All right, very cool. A few questions have come in the chat as well from a grade 6 class in Ottawa. And so they want to know first, is there somewhere, a shoot or a place where you felt unsafe, and what helped you
Mhm.
feel safer in that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I try to be careful about where I put myself. I know friends who are war photographers. I am not. I know that that's not the right it's not a fit for my personality. I think whatever you decide to do, I think it's really important that you listen to what feels right for you. And in photography, a lot of how you create and what kind of story you want to create comes from what interests you and what feels right for you. So the kind of stories that you're going to be good at are the stories that you're excited about. Um, so I know that I have I can put myself in situations that are a little bit risky, but if they're too risky, I'm gonna be focused on staying safe, not the story. That's just me. But the work in, northern Uganda was a little bit scary because the terrorism that had been there. Um, and I wasn't sure I was gonna stay overnight in that village. And the way I managed it was giving myself permission to not stay. If I didn't feel safe, I didn't have to. No photograph is worth getting hurt. Nothing is worth that. And so I always do research. I talk to lots of people before a trip, even if it's not particularly dangerous. I want to know everything that I can, so I'm prepared. When I was in Nepal, there was some political stuff, and so I wanted to know, oh, if I see, groups of people, should I go the other way or is it interesting story? So I always like to do research, and then I ask my team, this is what I'm comfortable with, this is what I'm not. And then when I stayed in the village in northern Uganda, I only brought one camera and only a few things so that if something, a little bit scary did happen, and I could just say, here you go, take my camera. It's just a camera. Um, but that was probably one of the more uncomfortable things. But of course, because I was prepared and we researched a family to stay with very carefully, it was great. The family was amazing. Nothing happened. Um, but you have to do your research.
All right, one more from those grade 6s in Ottawa. Is there a location, a favorite shooting spot
Ooh,
that you've been?
the next one?
That's a good answer.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, so my family is mostly in Montana. So I love going to Montana, because it has a lot of the elements that I showed here. I live in Boston, which is not very wild. Um, but I have always liked being in places that don't have a lot of people. Some people, I like photographing people, clearly, but a lot of nature. I think, we have a extraordinary planet, and it's very easy to forget that we're we're only one species out of millions, probably. And so I like being in places that you feel small in a good way, and you feel part of something, like this beautiful, huge world. And Montana is close by, it's not that far away, and it's very beautiful. It's challenging. It's got a lot of wild spaces. But there's even closer places like that, like Maine. And so I like really anywhere that reminds me that I'm a part of nature.
Yeah. Great. Okay. I like this question. This is a technology question because you did mention AI briefly at the beginning. So like you can type something into a prompt, eagle flying over a lake or something.
Yeah.
Do you worry that AI might compete with, real photography getting out there in the field?
It's a really good question. Yeah, so a lot of photographers are talking about that, and we are trying to figure that out. I think in some areas of photography, it will.
Hmm.
And so photography is a bit like being a doctor, which is a weird statement, but if you think about it, there are many different kinds of doctors, right? So you could be an eye doctor, you could be a general practitioner, you could be a foot doctor. So there are lots of different types of photographers. You could be a wedding photographer, you can be a product photographer, you could be a travel photographer. So there are certain areas of photography that AI is sort of a danger to. But one thing with photojournalism and documentary photography is that by definition, they have to be a real photograph.
Hmm.
So hopefully that won't be affected by AI. But of course, AI files right now, you can't tell the difference between an AI image and a camera generated image. But I know camera companies are actually coming out with technology so that the file out of a camera will show that's a camera generated.
Yeah.
But that's the understanding, because photojournalism has to be a real photograph. But AI is a very interesting thing right now in photography. Yeah.
All right. So I think we can squeeze in at least one more before we wrap up today. And I think this is a good one to leave off on. Is there a story you've been wanting to tell, but just haven't had the chance yet?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Oh, so many, but well, there's a story I'm on right now that I'm very excited about, and it will be for probably a while. And it's a story I want to tell, so I don't know, I'm not doing it for anyone else. But I hope it will go to a magazine or somewhere. So, and it's in my backyard. So I love animals, I love nature, I love conservation. So, um, it's a story about farmers in the US and in Europe who, instead of using tractors, are turning back to using animals. So oxen, draft horses, and mules to farm and to log. And so there's this small subsection of the larger farming community that's doing this, which of course you could use a tractor and it's more efficient and it's faster, but these people are choosing to use these animals because it's environmentally more responsible, and it's also a more beautiful relationship and a more beautiful process. And so I've been documenting that for a year and probably will for a few years. And actually last weekend, one of the farmers taught me how to drive horses, which was amazing. So that's been something I'm really excited to tell.
Okay. Well, we definitely hope you get that opportunity to share that story. I'm going to squeak one more question that came from here, and it's advice for someone
Mm.
who's just picking up a camera, and maybe, is thinking about photography as a possible career.
Oh, I love that. Oh my goodness. So first of all, stay curious. Just all of you, no matter what, photographer or not, stay curious, ask the why. never give that up. And then, you know, if you're thinking about being a photographer, or even if you're not, I think looking at the world. So I came to photography as an adult again. So I was a photographer as a kid and then came back to it because I wanted to slow down time and I wanted to see more carefully. And we all move so fast and we're doing this and we're doing that and we're going somewhere. And I picked up my camera, and you could do this with a phone. It doesn't have to be a camera. I just wanted to see things. And I think you can do that to be a photographer. You can do that to just feel like a happier human. But when you look through something, and it can literally just be your hands, to see, oh my gosh, that's a beautiful leaf, or wow, that sunset's beautiful. Is it more beautiful if I look here or I look here? Or I've never seen anyone look at it this way. I like it that way. That's a little weird. I like weird. And really start exploring how you see, which might be completely different than everyone else. And that's awesome. Like, photography really is about finding your voice, and how you see the world, and just taking the time to do that. And I think that's a really good thing for everyone to do, because we don't do that in modern culture. You know, we move fast and we don't spend time to just be in a place. Like, sit down in one place and look at each thing around you. Just turn 360 degrees and look and see all the images. If you have a phone or a camera, take beautiful, see the weird, look down at your feet, look up above, and just see all the things that you might see. That's my advice on your dog walks. Look on your walk to school. Look, see, like, what kind of, are you into beauty? Are you into people? Are you into strange things? Or how do you see the world? That's my advice.
All right. I think that's absolutely great advice, Julianne, and a perfect place to have to say goodbye today. I want to give a shout out to our classrooms who joined us. Thank you so much for hanging out with us and sending in your great questions. And Julianne, it's such a pleasure to have you join us for the first time.
Thank you so much.
And we're just going to have to catch you again. Maybe we can get you in the field one time, or after another storytelling expedition out in the field.
I would love that. Thank you for the great questions. Those were awesome questions. I hope you guys do play with photography or just seeing. It's an awesome way to go through the world.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Julianne, thank you so much. And we are going to sign off for today.
Have a great day.